I will hand over to you and I will start focusing on the back end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darlene, and thanks everybody for coming to this session. I really appreciate having an audience. I know sometimes attending online is not the easiest thing. So this is just the housekeeping that Darlene already went over. Before I get started, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people that are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other First Nations people who are present here today. And I just feel so fortunate to be presenting from where I'm presenting today, which is actually the balcony of my residence. And that picture on the slide is my view at the moment. So today we're going to talk about several things, just so you know what we're looking out for while I'm presenting, ways that we can incorporate principles of UDL into course design, how to begin, how do you even get started doing this? How do you organize for UDL? Providing multiple ways for students to access course content, engage in the course, and meet their learning outcomes, and supporting students' organizational time management skills and accessible communication. That's a whole lot, and I don't have a whole lot of time, so you're going to kind of get an overview. And with some resources, so you can, I encourage you to go ahead and examine this stuff further. I'm also not going to go over the basics of UDL because I'm guessing if you've been here in this session, in the conference the last 2 days, you pretty much know what they are. So you're likely already doing quite a bit of UDL in your course, whether you realize it or not, because it really is just good teaching and providing students with different ways to access course material, to engage with the material, and to show you what they learned. Normally, we're really good at providing multiple means of representation. We use lectures, we embed video into them, we do discussions. So we provide different ways of presenting the material in our courses for the most part. But it's often difficult, even engagement, and I think COVID actually improved most instructors' skills on different ways to get students engaged, because suddenly we were doing all of our courses online and trying to make the courses as engaging as possible when you're not sitting face to face. I lecture in the field of education, so this really felt difficult for me because I'm so used to modeling different classroom management techniques as I'm walking around the room. So having to switch everything to digital and find ways that my students could feel like they were part of what was going on was a bit of a challenge, but we all eventually met that challenge. But one of the hardest things to do with UDL in a university course is to provide students with multiple means of action and expression. And also, I'm mostly talking about assessments, because those of you that teach at the university level know that trying to get an assessment changed at all in your course takes 4 committees and an act of God. So saying I'm going to give students the choice between this, this, and this for this one assessment can confound some of those committees that aren't familiar with UDL and the fact that we can find different ways to equitably measure whether or not students are meeting the learning outcome. The other thing we don't often see in university courses is student choice. And students aren't used to having choice either. They're used to going into class and getting the course syllabus or course outline and finding out we're doing this, 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 and this. This is what the assessment is. This is what I'm doing. Nobody ever says, what would you like to do? So I'm going to talk today about how to provide more choice for the most part in your course design. So how do we do this? The most important thing always, I think, when you're designing using universal design for learning is to really have a sense of what the course's learning outcomes are and how those break down to smaller outcomes for weekly, or if you're working in modules, what are the modular outcomes for each module? And then think about how you can provide different modes of representation, engagement, action, and expression. This just sounds really simple. This is UDL, right? How can we give students a choice? So I have to give credit. I was working with a special school here in Sydney on bringing UDL into their school as their overall way of teaching because they were doing distance education. And the teachers actually created this when they were trying to figure out how they would create units using UDL. So they have the learning objectives going down the left side and then the instructional methods across the top. And there's a space for you to write different ways. How can you present the concept? How can you make it engaging for every student? And how can students express what they've learned or how they've met the learning outcomes? I really like that they also incorporated these little symbols at the bottom. So after you put each thing, you could just put the symbol next to it and it lets you check really quick whether you're overly emphasizing one mode of learning over another, or to make sure that you're covering all of those things. Granted, I think kinesthetics not always something we think about including, and it's good for us to actually give that a lot of thought on how we can include kinesthetic activities into it. In addition to choice, I find that often my students struggle with organizing. Giving them this schedule that not only tells them what topics we're going to be talking about, whether or not there's a lecture and whether or not it's going to be online or in person. Is there a tutorial? And what should I be doing on my own? Now, if you look at that column, you'll see it says choose 3 of the activities listed in the week 1 tab in order to meet the learning outcomes. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second. Another way to support students' organization is to provide a glossary. No matter what subject area you're teaching, especially at the university level, we have technical language. This glossary, if you look at it, is from a classroom management course I teach. It's advanced behavior support for students with disabilities. There are so many acronyms and so many terms that you just wouldn't come across normally. So the students actually asked me for this a couple of years ago. So I have a running glossary and I encourage students to add to it or to let me know. Usually I do a kind of a wiki on Google for them so they can go in and add things to the glossary, but this is how it sits on my Moodle account. And while I'm saying that, I think I should also mention that Moodle and Blackboard aren't always so intuitive, and people struggle with the whole setup sometimes also. I know that my university has gone out of their way to do a whole Moodle enhance and try to simplify everything and make it so most of us have things at least organized in the same way without taking away our academic freedom to teach what we want, how we want to, but so that students can find things more easily. Okay, so when I talk about including choice, this is what a typical week might look like. If you see at the top there, it says week 1, and then there's 5 student learning outcomes. I start with mandatory activities. But if you look, even under the mandatory activities, students have a choice because I teach my lectures in hybrid mode, which means that I've got students sitting in front of me and students online all at the same time, plus it's being recorded. So they have a choice on whether they want to attend synchronously or asynchronously, synchronously in person or synchronously online. And I give them all the information of how they can do that. The other thing that's mandatory for this particular course, because it's an initial teacher education course, so it has tutorials. So they have to attend their tutorial. And they get a choice when they register whether they want to attend online or in person. But they don't get as much freedom with that because we're accredited by NESA they have to attend tutorials. Then I give them a choice. Choose 2 activities from the following. Some of them are reading, some of them are watching videos. And if you look after each one, I have the weekly learning outcomes listed. So basically, it's a choose your own adventure. In order to meet all the learning outcomes, you have to make sure that you're picking the right things. And before I go on to that, just so you know, that's not the only set of choices. I just couldn't fit it all on the slide. Every week, one of their choices is also to participate in the discussion, and I usually give them a topic to chat about with each other. And quite a few students do participate in that, and I think that really helps with their engagement. I monitor the discussion boards. I let them know that I don't read every single post because I've got 200 students in that course, so I can't. But they do answer each other, and I kind of randomly read and answer posts. And that's the way I manage to do this without overloading myself time-wise, which is always such a concern. Because to be totally honest, to set up all these different choices in the beginning takes a long time. And obviously, every time I teach the course, I have to update, make sure these things are still there. Maybe there's a new reading, maybe there's a new video. So for assessment choice, my advice normally is to go ahead and make sure whatever your assessments are listed as in the official online, whatever system your university uses, that it's kind of a broad general category so that you can cover more than one option. So if you look at my first assessment, it's exploration and design of a tier 3 behavioral intervention. So they get to pick what intervention and what they're going to do. So I can do that without having to go through changing what I'm doing with the learning and teaching committee from the school, from the faculty, and getting all the approvals, because both of these options fit what that assessment is. I also create very detailed rubrics for each of these options, and the students get a copy of it on the Moodle. So as they're doing the assessment, they know exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, keeping to my time, I'm already at the conclusion. So basically what I'm saying is to provide students with as many options as you can for engagement, representation, action and expression, organization. Try to include all of the modes. Support organization as much as you can. Provide those different options for attending lectures. And I'm not going to lie to you, teaching in hybrid mode is cognitively taxing. It really is. I'm getting better at it, but it was definitely something I needed to practice in the beginning, because you're not only paying attention to 2 groups of students, you're often also managing the technology. Co-produce with students before class if possible, but definitely do it during the course. I always ask them, what can I do better to support your learning? Is there some kind of resource that you wish I included and I didn't? Or would you like me to change one of the resources I've given you? Is there something I could do to make it more accessible for you? And then the visual that's there is from CAST, and I stole that off of UDL on campus. And if you go to the website, it's an interactive visual. And when you click on those options, it gives you a ton of ideas for how you can give them more options for recruiting interest, for sustaining effort and persistence. So it's a really, really good resource. So I'm assuming that Darlene's got the questions in the chat.
Well, no one's put any in as yet, but feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. Is another option with we've got about 50 or 60 people in here, so that's easy to manage. So thank you so much for that, Terry. It's great to see some real practical examples there, and it's wonderful. Ray has been posting in the chat some of the images of what you've been doing, which has been great. So any questions that people have? No hands up. So we'll be putting the presentations up online, as well as the recordings and those practical sheets that you showcased. You know, the PowerPoint will be there for people to access and utilize as well. So, okay, so we've got some new messages. I better click into this. Okay. So from Kwan, how do you justify to others the different assessments are actually at the same level and one is not easier than the other?
I think that you do that with the rubrics, because you've got to make sure that they're meeting those learning outcomes from the course. And I always link the assessments to the learning outcomes anyway, because that's good practice. So it's easy to show them then, look, they have to do all these things and these folks have to do all these things.
Yeah.
So that's how I do it.
So Ray added same rubric for both tasks, like for...
That would be beautiful. But for the most part, it is, because I am measuring learning outcomes, but there's little bits and pieces. Like if you're writing a report, I'm going to want it to be in APA. So I'll have a thing on APA in there. And, you know, if you're doing something different, like a video, I might have organization or that sort of thing.
Yep. No, that's great. Ray's asked, with the assessment options, how do you help students make a choice? And also then, do you find one choice more popular than another?
Okay, that's really an interesting question and something I should have talked about, not just with the assessments, but for the weekly choices. For some students, even though we're talking adult students, we don't all have that self-determination to choose our own adventure. Some students really, really want you to just give them what to do. So I'm thinking about now adding some supportive documents, like if you're a visual learner, you might want to choose these options. And the same for the assessments. And I'm always happy to sit down and talk to students. And yes, some years everybody chooses one, and other years everyone chooses the other one. So it's never, I think they are equally difficult. But I think, you know, for some people, one would be more difficult than the other. I would always rather write an essay than take a quiz or make a video. But other people would rather die than write an essay. So really, how difficult it is depends on who you are.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Martina's asked, you mentioned accreditation and mandatory tutorial attendance. Can you expand on that? Interested in the maintenance of the F2F component.
Well, we have to prove to our accrediting body that our students, because when we get accredited, we have to say it's taught, it's practiced, and it's assessed. So we have to tick all those boxes. So for taught, we have the course contents from all the courses in our program. So in order to say that students were taught those things, students kind of have to either be there or show somehow that they've attended the lecture. So if they attend asynchronously, my school has a requirement that they do at least a paragraph of bullet points on what the lecture was about, the main points of the lecture, so that we have some kind of written record that shows they were there, besides, you know, I take attendance online and in person. I can also check on the Moodle to see who was at the lecture when, for how long. There's a way to do that. I personally hate this because I feel like I'm a teacher, not a record keeper, but that's an important part of our job that does take up a lot of time, but it's getting easier now. You can have students sign in for attendance on the Moodle too. So it will take all of that for you. But yeah, I always have to have some kind of proof for the accrediting body that we have done it, but they don't need to be face-to-face. For international students, for the postgrad courses, yeah, that's a visa requirement. So that's a different thing altogether.
Yeah. The challenge of the administration of all our roles as well, it's yeah, it can take us away from our passions. And yeah, well, that's fabulous. That's some great questions there. Thank you for everybody for your engagement level. Thank you, Terry, so much for your presentation. As I said, there's some real practical examples. Terry's put her email address up there, which is t.cumming, so CUMMING @unsw.edu.au. So I encourage you all to engage with Terry further beyond this symposium, and encourage you all over to the next session. So thank you, Terry. It was great, and we look forward to seeing many of you in a following session. Take care.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye.